Story 1. Standing before the mirror, I meticulously dressed for my first day at work. The outfit, freshly acquired just yesterday, consisted of sturdy trousers, heavy boots, and a new hard hat. I methodically checked my toolkit, ensuring nothing important was forgotten. Breakfast was a simple affair, strong coffee and toast. As I sipped and chewed, my mind wandered through anticipations of the day ahead. How would I gel with my colleagues? Could I handle the work demands? Leaving my apartment, a flutter of nerves accompanied me. The bus ride to the mine took no more than 20 minutes, but it felt like a journey through different worlds, from the bustling city streets to the open expanses leading to the mining settlement. Upon arrival, a group of miners gathered at the entrance caught my eye. Among them, Edward and Louisa, whom I had met before, stood out. Approaching, I greeted them. Louisa responded with a warm smile, while Edward merely nodded. We engaged in light conversation, waiting for our supervisor to arrive. The surrounding atmosphere was strangely quiet, the usual hustle of the morning strangely subdued. An inexplicable chill ran down my spine as I glanced at the looming mine entrance. The darkness beyond seemed to stare back, an abyss promising more than just physical toil. I shivered, attributing the unease to first-day jitters. However, as we waited, the air grew heavier, as if charged with an unspoken dread. Whispers among the miners spoke of recent strange occurrences within the mine. Unexplained sounds, equipment malfunctions, even fleeting shadows that had no source. Trying to shake off the unease, I focused on the mundane details of my surroundings. The gritty texture of the hard hat in my hands, the smell of earth and machinery oil mingling in the air, the distant clanking of metal on stone echoing faintly from within the mine. Finally, our supervisor arrived, a stern figure who briskly briefed us on the day's tasks. After a thorough safety briefing, I was paired with Louisa as my mentor. It was time to descend into the mine. As we approached the entrance, the massive lift stood like a gateway to another world. We stepped inside, the door clanging shut behind us. As the lift began its descent, Louisa started explaining the workings of the mine. Though I had undergone training, her insights into the nuances of the mine's operations were invaluable. Her voice was steady, a contrast to the slight quiver I felt in my own. The descent was a gradual immersion into darkness. The light from the lift's interior cast eerie shadows on the walls as we descended deeper. I could hear the creaks and groans of the lift cables, a haunting symphony to our descent. With a jolt, the lift came to a stop, and the doors opened to reveal a vast cavern. It was well lit, the artificial lights creating an illusion of safety within the bowels of the earth. Louisa led the way to the equipment storage, her stride confident and practiced. As we geared up, I noticed the cave's vastness, its ceiling lost in shadows. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of earth and metal. The sound of distant machinery and echoing footsteps filled the cavern, a constant reminder of the activity hidden in the mine's labyrinthine passages. We started our walk deeper into the cave, engaging in light conversation. The others in the group chatted casually, their familiarity with the environment evident in their relaxed demeanor. I tried to join in, my attempts at conversation somewhat strained by the surreal setting. The path twisted and turned, leading us through tunnels that felt like the arteries of some ancient, slumbering beast. The walls were rough, occasionally glistening with mineral deposits. The sound of our footsteps and voices bounced off the walls, distorting and melding into the ambient sounds of the mine. As we walked, the light from our headlamps danced on the walls, casting long, wavering shadows. Every so often, a flicker of movement would catch my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing but rock and shadow. Louisa noticed my unease and reassured me. "It's normal to feel a bit on edge down here. The mine has a way of playing tricks on your mind." Despite her words, a sense of foreboding grew within me. The mine felt alive, its silence not empty but expectant, as if waiting for something to stir from its depths. Finally, we reached our designated work area. The space opened up, the machinery and tools laid out ready for use. We began our work, the sound of drilling and hammering echoing through the cavern. I focused on the task at hand, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of the work. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Occasionally, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. The work commenced with Edward methodically setting up the explosives. We all donned our masks and retreated to a safe distance. A muffled explosion rattled through the cavern, followed by a billowing cloud of dust. We waited patiently for the dust to settle before returning to the site. For the next few hours, our routine was unvarying. Sorting and loading the ore, the work was monotonous, but not without its rhythm. Gradually, I began to acclimate to the cadence of the mine, the sound of metal against rock becoming a familiar backdrop. During short breaks, we began to converse more freely. Louisa shared stories about her life, her voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. Edward, on the other hand, remained an enigma, sharing little and keeping to himself. It was during one of these breaks that we heard a sudden shout from a nearby tunnel. Exchanging puzzled looks, we decided to investigate. As we approached the source of the commotion, we saw a group of miners huddled together, peering down at something. Drawing closer, we discovered the object of their attention, a large, white, spherical object about the size of a small dog. It resembled an egg, but it was far too large for any bird. The miners around us were equally baffled. One of the miners explained that they found it after blasting through a section of rock. It had somehow survived the explosion intact, an enigma in itself. Curiosity piqued, I reached out and carefully picked up the object. It was surprisingly light and warm to the touch, its surface smooth and almost pearlescent. The idea of it being a dinosaur egg crossed my mind, but that seemed far too fantastical. Yet, what else could it be? As I turned the object over in my hands, I impulsively brought it close to my ear. To my utter shock, I heard a faint but distinct heartbeat. A jolt of fear surged through me, and I nearly dropped the mysterious egg. I relayed my discovery to the others, and we collectively decided that it was imperative to bring this find to the surface. Just as we were discussing how to transport it safely, the ground beneath us trembled violently. A sudden earthquake struck, sending us scrambling for cover. Rocks and debris clattered down around us, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Thankfully, the epicenter seemed to be elsewhere, and we were spared from any major cave-ins. In the wake of the tremor, we quickly regrouped and conducted a roll call. Fortuitously, everyone was accounted for and unharmed. The lights flickered ominously above us, but thankfully remained lit. Our immediate concern was the ventilation system, which, to our relief, was still functioning, circulating fresh air through the dusty tunnels. Gathering our wits, we decided to head towards the exit, not forgetting the mysterious egg. Now in the possession of a miner named Dave. As we ascended, we navigated through the minor destruction left in the earthquake's wake. The atmosphere thick with tension and unspoken fears. Our steady progress was abruptly halted when we reached the path leading to the lift. A heart-sinking realization hit us. The way was blocked by rubble. Panic flickered in the eyes of my companions, a mirror to my own rising dread. Edward, the most seasoned among us, stepped forward to calm the group. His voice, steady and reassuring, was a lighthouse in the storm of our collective anxiety. As we stood there, assessing the situation, several more miners from adjacent tunnels joined us, including our foreman. A second roll call was conducted, a routine tinged with urgency. It was then we discovered the unsettling truth. Someone was missing. Our foreman, with a tone of command, swiftly organized us into 2 teams. While one would work on clearing the debris, the other, which included Louisa, Dave, and myself, was tasked with searching for the missing miner. Dave, still clutching the egg with a protective grip, seemed reluctant to part with it. The egg, now a silent participant in our ordeal, added an otherworldly element to the already tense situation. Receiving our instructions, we set off, our headlamps cutting through the darkness, casting long shadows on the rough walls. The silence of the tunnels was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the distant, muffled efforts of the team working to clear the blocked exit. As we ventured deeper into the mine, the dim lighting and cramped spaces made the search increasingly challenging. Each turn and each new tunnel brought a mix of hope and apprehension. The missing miner could be just around the next bend, or we could be walking further into a labyrinth with no easy way out. The egg, cradled in Dave's arms, seemed almost to pulsate in the dim light, its surface gleaming oddly. I couldn't help but feel a certain unease towards it, an irrational fear that it was somehow connected to our predicament. Louisa, ever the voice of reason, kept us focused on the task at hand. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the eerie surroundings and the growing sense of foreboding that enveloped us. We checked every possible space, calling out for the missing miner, the sound of our voices echoing eerily in the vast, empty tunnels. With each passing minute, the weight of the mine seemed to press down on us, a tangible reminder of the danger we were in. The search felt endless, a repetitive cycle of hope and disappointment. We traversed through familiar and unfamiliar paths, each one indistinguishable from the last in the disorienting darkness. In the dimly lit tunnel, our search took a harrowing turn when we heard a faint groan. We rushed towards the sound, hearts pounding with a mix of dread and urgency. There, partially buried under rubble, were several miners, alive but injured. We sprang into action, carefully removing the debris to free them. The task was arduous, our hands working frantically against time. Sweat and dust mingled on our brows as we lifted rocks and debris with trembling hands. Finally, we pulled the last miner to safety, their expressions a blend of pain and relief. We quickly transitioned to administering first aid. My hands, now smeared with blood, worked mechanically, applying bandages and pressure to wounds. It was then that I noticed Dave, after tying a bandage, reaching for the egg again. His hands, stained with blood, brushed against the egg's surface, which seemed to quiver in response. A chill ran down my spine as I observed the egg appearing to absorb the blood, its surface pulsating subtly. Astonishingly, Dave seemed oblivious to this eerie phenomenon. I voiced my observation, a tremor in my words betraying my fear. Dave dismissed it as stress-induced hallucination, his attention firmly fixed on the egg. I wanted to argue, to make him see the unnerving change, but the urgency of our situation forced me to shelve my concerns. With a wounded miner leaning on each of our shoulders, we began our slow and cautious journey back through the tunnel. Dave, still cradling the enigmatic egg, followed behind. The passage was eerily quiet, save for the labored breathing of the injured and the soft scuffle of our boots on the rocky ground. As we navigated the labyrinthine tunnels, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on us. Each step was a painful reminder of our precarious position, deep within the Earth's embrace. The flickering lights cast ominous shadows, transforming the familiar paths into a maze of uncertainty. It was then, amidst the oppressive silence, that I realized something was amiss. The sound of footsteps behind us had ceased. I turned around, expecting to see Dave, but he was gone. The tunnel where he had been just moments before was empty, the egg along with him. Panic surged through me, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and confusion. I called out his name, my voice echoing through the tunnels, met only with silence. Louisa, supporting the less injured miner, looked back, her eyes wide with concern. Fear gripped my heart, but determination pushed me forward. While Louisa tended to the injured, I ventured back into the labyrinthine tunnels to search for Dave. The dim, flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls as I walked, each step heavy with apprehension. After navigating a series of turns, I caught sight of a figure in the distance. It was Dave, standing with his back to me, the egg cradled in his arms. I called out to him, my voice echoing off the walls. He turned slowly, the egg held out in front of him. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the egg, his expression one of hypnotic trance. Suddenly, a crackling sound pierced the silence. I watched in horror as cracks began to spider across the surface of the egg. It trembled violently, shifting from side to side. My heart raced as I realized that something was about to emerge. The top of the eggshell broke off, and from within a grotesque creature emerged. It resembled a dog or a wolf, but bore disturbingly human or rat-like features. The creature stretched languidly, a chilling intelligence in its gaze as it surveyed its surroundings. First, its eyes locked with mine. Fear rooted me to the spot, and I stumbled backward, falling onto the ground. Then it turned its head towards Dave, who remained transfixed, his gaze never leaving the monster. The creature opened its mouth impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. In one swift, horrifying motion, it engulfed Dave's head and began to gnaw with a sickening crunch. Dave's body stood momentarily before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. Panic surged through me, adrenaline fueling my escape. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, my breath ragged, heart pounding in my chest. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn a disorienting maze. Finally, I reached Louisa and the injured miners. Without uttering a word, I grabbed the wounded miner and hurried them towards the exit. Louisa, alarmed and confused, asked about Dave. Gasping for breath, I managed to utter that he was dead and that we needed to flee. She tried to question me further, but I was too shaken to explain. My words stumbled out incoherently, my terror evident. I insisted we would discuss it once we were safe, my mind still reeling from the nightmarish encounter. Upon reaching the debris where our team was working, several miners rushed to assist us with the injured. Exhausted and shaken, I collapsed to the ground, trying to process the surreal horror I had just witnessed. The foreman approached, concern etched on his face, and I blurted out that Dave was dead. But before I could say more, the crowd parted, and to my utter disbelief, Dave appeared, whole and unharmed. My mind reeled in confusion and terror. The image of the monstrous creature and Dave's supposed death clashed with the reality in front of me. Was what I witnessed in the tunnel a hallucination, a trick of the mind fueled by fear and stress? Or was there a more sinister explanation to Dave's impossible reappearance? Terror gripped me as I stood before the group, Dave's gaze boring into me. Nobody else seemed to notice, but I could swear I saw a sinister smirk on his face. My first instinct was to run, to escape the unnerving stare of this man who I was sure was no longer Dave. Gathering courage, I recounted the events at the egg's location, explaining Dave's gruesome end. Louisa stood by me, corroborating my story. The foreman, perplexed yet concerned, decided that we needed to investigate the site. Edward agreed to accompany us. As we prepared to leave, Dave volunteered to join. I protested in horror, but the foreman, urging calm, allowed him to come along. I led the way, my legs shaking, constantly glancing back at Dave. Each time our eyes met, he gave me a subtle, unnerving squint. His gaze held a terrifying secret, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was leading us into a trap. Rational thoughts battled with my intuition. Perhaps I was suffering from gas inhalation, or the earthquake had caused some sort of hallucination. But deep down, something primal screamed for me to flee. Upon reaching the site, we found unmistakable traces of blood. Pointing to the spot, I reiterated my account. The foreman turned to Dave, bombarding him with questions. Dave's responses were short and strained, as if speaking was a labor. Edward then stepped forward, asking Dave about a conversation they supposedly had in a bar the previous night. Dave's response was a mumbled, incoherent mess. Suddenly his face contorted in rage, and he let out an unnatural howl, his body beginning to morph into a horrific, wolf-like creature. The monster lunged at the foreman, its teeth sinking into his throat. Paralyzed with fear, I felt certain death was imminent, when suddenly Edward grabbed my arm and yanked me away. Snapping back to reality, we ran for our lives, the sounds of the foreman's struggle echoing behind us. The tunnels became a blur as we sprinted, the terror of the monstrous Dave propelling us forward. My mind raced with fear and confusion. The creature, the egg, and now this transformation. What were we dealing with? Were we trapped in some sort of nightmare? Gasping for breath, my mind racing with terror, I trailed behind Edward, realizing with dread that we weren't heading towards the main exit, but rather into an uncharted direction of the mine. My voice, strained with fear, echoed in the narrow tunnel. "Where are we running to?" Edward's response sent a shiver down my spine. "We can't risk leading it to the others. It's too dangerous." We hastened our steps, dodging fallen debris and navigating through the labyrinthine tunnels. The dim lighting barely illuminated our path, casting long, ominous shadows that seemed to dance around us. Finally, Edward stopped abruptly in front of an old, rusted hatch. With a grunt of effort, he wrenched it open, revealing a gaping abyss below. A forgotten shaft, its depths swallowed by darkness. Edward positioned himself strategically opposite the opening, his eyes fixed on the ominous void. "The plan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is to stand our ground and sidestep at the last moment when it attacks. We'll use its momentum against it." I glanced at the open hatch, my heart pounding against my ribs. This was like a scene straight out of a horror film. Yet here we were, staging a real-life standoff against an unimaginable terror. The air grew thick with tension as we awaited the creature's arrival. The sound of its labored breathing grew louder, accompanied by the heavy, irregular beat of its footsteps. It emerged from around the corner, moving with a deliberate, predatory grace. Its twisted smile was a grotesque display of pleasure, relishing the trap it had sprung. Frozen in terror, we watched as the creature prepared to strike. Suddenly, with a ferocious speed, it lunged towards us. Edward's reflexes were lightning fast as he shoved me aside, narrowly evading the creature's deadly grasp. The beast, missing its target, soared past us but managed to graze Edward's arm with its claw-like hand. He teetered on the brink of the pit. Instinctively, I lunged forward, grabbing his pants and yanking him back to safety. From the depths of the pit, a haunting howl reverberated, echoing our own fears. I quickly glanced at Edward's arm and saw blood oozing from a deep gash, the fabric of his shirt torn. He clenched his teeth, covering the wound with his other hand, but there was no time to tend to it properly. We had to keep moving. With renewed urgency, we dashed towards the exit, our footsteps echoing in the now eerily silent tunnels. We made it to the rubble pile. Louisa was there, her face etched with worry. Seeing us alone, she asked about the foreman. Our silent, grim expressions conveyed the tragic news. Her face crumpled in horror and disbelief. Without wasting another moment, we ushered her towards the elevator. The urgency was palpable. Every second counted. Inside, the survivors sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting a myriad of emotions: fear, relief, shock. As the elevator began its ascent, I took one last glance at the tunnel. My blood turned to ice as I saw the creature clawing its way out of the shaft, its eyes burning with a malevolent rage. I screamed at the operator to move faster. Edward, with a sense of finality, slammed the cage door shut. The creature's howl, a blend of anger and frustration, followed us as we ascended. Reaching the surface was surreal. The open sky, the fresh air felt like a different world compared to the darkness below. Everyone disembarked in silence, their relief palpable yet overshadowed by the horror of what lay beneath. Edward, with a resolute expression, took the remaining explosives and placed them carefully in the elevator. His hands, steady despite the injury, set the timer. With one final nod, he sent the elevator back down into the depths. Moments later, the ground shuddered beneath our feet as a thunderous explosion echoed through the mine, followed by the rumbling collapse of the shaft. Dust and debris billowed up from the entrance, a stark testament to the finality of our actions. I collapsed onto the ground, my body and mind succumbing to the exhaustion and shock. Around me, I could hear the faint cries and murmurs of my fellow survivors, each lost in their own relief and trauma. My eyes gazed blankly at the sky, trying to reconcile the day's nightmarish events. It was supposed to be just my first day at work, a new beginning. Instead, it turned into a harrowing fight for survival, an encounter with an unspeakable horror from the depths below. Story 2. It was a week before Christmas, and I awoke earlier than usual. The house was shrouded in a stillness that only the pre-dawn hours can muster. I moved quietly to the kitchen, feeling the chill of the tiled floor beneath my feet, a stark contrast to the warmth of my bed. The ritual of making breakfast for two had become a comforting routine, a semblance of normalcy in a world turned upside down since the accident. As I cracked eggs into the sizzling pan, The memories flooded back. Memories of her, cooking in this very kitchen, her laughter filling the space. The scent of the brewing coffee momentarily brought a sense of peace, but it was fleeting. I called out to my son, his name echoing slightly in the quiet house. "Jake, breakfast is ready." No response. A frown creased my forehead. Since the accident, he'd been different. Withdrawn, almost like a shadow of the vibrant boy he used to be. I walked to his room, the hallway seeming longer than usual. The door creaked as I opened it, revealing the dimly lit room. There he was, a small lump under the covers, the dinosaur toy his mother had given him clutched tightly in his sleep. "Jake, come on. It's time to get up," I said, a gentle firmness in my voice. He murmured something incoherent, turning away. I reached out to shake him gently, but he shrugged off my hand. His behavior had changed so much in the past 6 months. The lively, cheerful boy had retreated into a shell of sullenness and caprice. It was heartbreaking. I remembered the day of the accident vividly. It had left me in a state of shock, numb to the world. I was lost in a haze of grief until my brother intervened. He had literally shaken me out of my stupor, dragging me to the backyard where I saw Jake, all alone, holding his toy dinosaur. The image was etched in my mind, the loneliness, the palpable sense of loss. My brother's words that day had been a wake-up call. "You need to be strong for him," he had said. And so I had tried. I continued to coax Jake out of bed. He kicked under the covers, a sign of frustration rather than defiance. Eventually, he relented, trudging to the bathroom with heavy steps. We sat down to breakfast in silence, the tension hanging in the air. The breakfast silence hung between us like a heavy curtain. As I watched Jake push his food around his plate, an idea sparked in my mind. "How about we go to the mall today? Pick out a Christmas gift for you," I suggested, hoping to see a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. At first there was a flicker of joy, but it quickly drowned in the ocean of his ongoing sorrow. He nodded silently and continued eating. An hour later, we were ready. The drive to the only mall in our small town was quiet. The silence punctuated only by the soft hum of the car engine. As we approached the mall, the festive atmosphere was immediately apparent. Christmas melodies floated through the air, mixing with the laughter and chatter of happy families. We parked and walked towards the entrance, our steps slow and heavy. I pondered what to get for Jake, hoping to bring some cheer into his life. "What would you like for Christmas?" I asked. He remained silent, his eyes distant. We entered the mall and headed straight to the toy department. The toy section was a child's wonderland, shelves bursting with colorful toys of all kinds. Jake, however, seemed uninterested, passing by without a second glance. We wandered aimlessly until he suddenly stopped in front of a shelf displaying toy dinosaurs. He picked up a pink one, contrasting with the blue one he had at home. "You can choose anything you like," I encouraged, relieved to see him show some interest. After paying for the dinosaur, we strolled through the mall. That's when I noticed a line of parents and children. They were waiting to see Santa Claus, who was seated among a sea of toys and decorations, with elves bustling around him. "Do you want to meet Santa?" I asked Jake. He didn't reply but joined the queue, and I smiled, hoping this would lift his spirits. After about 15 minutes, it was our turn. I nudged Jake forward. He approached Santa timidly and climbed onto his lap. Santa asked what he wished for Christmas. Jake whispered something, too low for me to hear. Santa leaned in, and Jake repeated his wish. Santa's smile then unsettled me. It didn't seem genuine. There was something off about it. He whispered something back to Jake, and I saw my son's eyes widen in shock. Suddenly, Jake dropped his toy and hit Santa on the nose, not hard, but enough to draw blood. He then jumped off Santa's lap, kicked him on the leg, and ran to hide behind me. The whole incident happened so fast that everyone around us was stunned. I apologized profusely, but Santa just laughed it off, saying it was okay. He picked up the toy dinosaur and offered it back to Jake, but my son refused to take it. I collected the toy, feeling uneasy about the strange glint I had noticed in Santa's eyes. We quickly left the mall, the festive atmosphere now feeling oppressive and sinister. The drive home was even quieter than before. I kept glancing at Jake in the rearview mirror, trying to decipher what had happened. His expression was one of fear and confusion, a stark contrast to the usual sadness. The drive back home was heavy with silence. I couldn't shake off the unease from our mall visit. Finally, I asked Jake what he had wished for and what Santa had said in response. Reluctantly, after much coaxing, he admitted his wish for his mother's return. The sadness in his voice was palpable, echoing my own heart's yearning. I tried to console him, saying it was a natural wish, one I shared too, but reality bit hard as I reminded him, and myself, that she was gone and we had to accept it. That's when he screamed, accusing me of being just like Santa, denying her return. His outburst shocked me, and I asked why he had reacted so violently toward Santa. His next words chilled me to the bone. Jake whispered that Santa had told him something horrific, that his mother was being eaten by worms and that while he couldn't bring her back, he could send Jake to her. I slammed on the brakes, fury and disgust swirling inside me. I decided to confront that vile Santa the next day. At home, I reassured Jake that the mall Santa was just a disturbed man, his words not worth our attention. But the shadow of that conversation loomed large over us. Our neighborhood was already adorned with Christmas decorations, yet I hadn't started on ours. I asked Jake if he wanted to help, but he declined, retreating to his room with his new dinosaur toy. Alone, I began decorating. First the indoor tree, then the kitchen and living room with garlands. Stepping outside to adorn the exterior, I strung lights around the door and windows. As dusk fell and I climbed the ladder to reach the upper windows, I noticed a figure near our house, standing behind a tree and staring in our direction. Initially, I dismissed it as a passerby, but an hour later, as I was finishing up, the figure was still there. Alarmed, I decided to investigate. Approaching the figure, I realized with a jolt of fear, it was a man dressed as Santa, the same eerie silhouette from the mall. As I moved closer, he noticed me and started to run in the opposite direction. I called out, but he quickened his pace and disappeared around a corner. I gave chase, but he vanished, leaving no trace behind. Returning home, my mind raced with fear and confusion. The sight of the Santa figure lurking near our house, the sinister encounter at the mall, and now this ominous presence. It all felt connected, a dark thread weaving through our lives. The festive lights around our home now seemed mocking, their cheerfulness a stark contrast to the growing dread within me. As I locked the door behind me, the safety of our home felt fragile. The shadows seemed to creep closer, and every creak and whisper of the house set my nerves on edge. The encounter with the Santa impersonator was more than a mere coincidence. It felt like a warning, a prelude to something far more sinister. I checked on Jake, finding him asleep, clutching his dinosaur toy. The innocence of his slumber was a stark contrast to the darkness that seemed to engulf our lives. The next morning, fueled by a mix of anger and determination, I headed to the mall. I needed to confront that twisted Santa. But upon arrival, I was met with an unexpected twist. The Santa from yesterday had been replaced. Confused, I approached the administration office. The administrator informed me that yesterday's Santa had disappeared mid-shift, taking the mall's Santa suit with him. She seemed as perplexed as I was and suggested I report the incident to the police. At the police station, I relayed our unsettling experience. The officers took my statement seriously but advised patience and vigilance, promising to look into the matter. Returning home, I tried to immerse myself in everyday tasks. The house, usually a sanctuary, now felt tainted by the shadows of fear. I spent the day in a restless state, attending to mundane chores and trying to distract myself. As evening fell, I gazed out the window only to feel a jolt of fear. The Santa silhouette was back, lurking behind a tree, watching our house. I immediately called the police. They arrived quickly, but frustratingly, the mysterious figure had vanished once again. For the next couple of days, this pattern continued. The figure would appear, instilling fear and unease, but would somehow elude capture, as if possessing some supernatural ability to disappear. On Christmas Eve, the air was thick with tension. After a quiet dinner, I tucked Jake into bed, his innocent sleep a stark contrast to the creeping dread outside. I tried to settle in front of the TV with a beer, but the thought of that lurking menace made relaxation impossible. Lost in my thoughts, a faint creak outside caught my attention. I decided to check on Jake. As I entered his room without turning on the light, a horrifying sight froze me in place. Framed in the window, illuminated by the Christmas lights, was a figure peering in. His eyes were wild, saliva dripping from his mouth, trailing down the fake beard. Jake slept, blissfully unaware of the nightmare just inches away. In a rush of adrenaline, I turned on the light and dashed outside, but found nothing. The figure had vanished into the night. I knew calling the police would be futile. Remembering the revolver I had tucked away, a chilling realization set in. I might soon have to confront this terror head-on, as frightening as that prospect was. As I stood there in the cold night, the festive lights mocking the darkness around me, I knew our peaceful life had been irrevocably shattered. I returned inside, locking the doors and checking on Jake again. He slept soundly, a small comfort in the midst of the chaos. Christmas Day dawned with a fleeting sense of normalcy. My brother arrived with his family in the morning, bringing a much-needed festive atmosphere. For a while, it felt like the old times. Jake played with his cousins, their laughter a soothing balm amidst our recent fears. My brother, his wife, and I caught up over cups of steaming coffee, the warmth of the house contrasting the cold outside. I shared with them the unsettling events of the past days. They listened, alarmed and incredulous as I recounted the mysterious Santa and his ominous appearances. We spent the day trying to immerse ourselves in the holiday spirit, but the shadow of fear loomed over us, unspoken yet palpable. As evening approached, my brother, sensing our unease, decided to take his family home but promised to return. We spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about our childhood, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. However, as midnight neared, a heavy, ominous feeling settled over the house, and we retired to bed, the laughter and warmth of the day fading into a silent, uneasy night. In the dead of night, a sense of dread jolted me awake. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every small noise, turning them into whispers of unseen threats. I tiptoed to the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and poured myself a glass of water, trying to calm my racing heart. Feeling a compelling need to check on Jake, I quietly opened his bedroom door. The sight that greeted me froze me in horror. There, in the dim light of the Christmas decorations, stood that monstrous Santa, his gaze fixated on Jake. My son lay in bed, wide-eyed with terror, clutching his toys as if they could protect him. Saliva dripped slowly from Santa's gaping mouth, his body trembling unnervingly. But then something even more horrifying began to happen. Santa's body convulsed violently, his limbs contorting into unnatural positions. Claws burst from his fingertips and fur sprouted on his exposed skin. His face transformed into a grotesque wolf-like visage, far removed from the cinematic werewolves of fantasy. This was a true monster, a nightmarish beast with a maw full of sharp, menacing teeth. As the creature crouched, poised to leap, instinct took over. I lunged forward, kicking it towards the window. The beast swiped at us, narrowly missing Jake but shredding his toy dinosaur. The toy's destruction seemed to momentarily distract the creature, giving us a crucial moment. I grabbed Jake and we bolted from the room. The beast gave chase, its movements unnaturally agile, bounding off the walls. It landed in front of us, blocking the exit, baring its fangs in a twisted grin as if relishing the hunt. With our path blocked and panic setting in, I grabbed a chair. The creature lunged, and I swung the chair with all my might. The impact sent us both reeling in opposite directions. Seizing the moment, I scooped up Jake and ran towards the back door. As we dashed past my brother's room, I yelled for him to grab the revolver. We burst out into the chilly night air, the door slamming shut behind us, the sounds of the creature's snarls and my brother's shouts echoing behind us. Panic-stricken, we ran through the deserted streets, the surreal glow of Christmas lights casting eerie shadows around us. I carried Jake on my back, his body trembling in silence. The world was eerily quiet, broken only by our heavy breaths and the pounding of my heart. Suddenly, a rustling noise from the bushes along the road caught my attention. A shadow flitted across the street, a dark form moving with terrifying speed and agility. Desperation gripped me. We were being hunted. As we continued our frantic escape, a figure lunged at me from the side. The impact was brutal, knocking the wind out of me. I was sent flying, Jake tumbling from my grasp. My vision blurred, my mind struggling to process what was happening. I saw Jake lying a short distance away, seemingly unharmed. Relief was short-lived as I noticed the creature hovering over him, saliva dripping from its monstrous jaws. With every ounce of strength, I forced myself up and lunged at the beast. We fell to the ground, grappling fiercely. Its claws pierced my shoulder, pain shooting through my body. I fought back fiercely, driven by a primal need to protect my son. Then the creature opened its maw wide, its fetid breath assaulting my senses as it bit down on my neck. Agony exploded through me, the stench overwhelming. I thought it was the end. But then gunshots rang out, loud and close. The creature's grip loosened with each shot. Its eyes glazed over and I managed to push it off me. Blood covered me, pouring from my neck. My brother rushed to my side, gun still smoking in his hand. He quickly checked on Jake, assuring me he was okay before turning his attention to my wound. The police and an ambulance arrived soon after. The paramedics stitched up my neck. The wound was serious, but not life-threatening. But the hospital was necessary. As I prepared to leave in the ambulance, my gaze fell upon the creature one last time. To my horror, lying there was not the monstrous beast, but the body of a man in a Santa suit. The realization sent chills down my spine. With Jake by my side, we climbed into the ambulance. As we drove away, the image of the man in the Santa suit haunted me. What had happened? Was it all some hallucination? The question swirled in my mind, but no answers came. The ambulance's lights flashed through the night, a stark contrast to the darkness that had engulfed our lives. I held Jake close, thankful he was safe, but terrified of what the future might hold. The nightmare seemed to be over, but the shadow of fear lingered, a silent reminder of the terror we had just escaped. The sterile smell of the hospital was the first thing that hit me as I slowly regained consciousness, a sharp contrast to the earthen metallic scent of blood that had filled my nostrils that fateful night. My body ached, every inch of my skin pulsating with a dull, persistent pain. As my eyes fluttered open, the blinding white lights of the hospital room bore down on me, making me squint. I tried to lift my hand to shield my eyes, but the effort seemed monumental. It wasn't long before the police officers arrived. They were two. One was tall and had a stoic expression plastered on his face, while the other was shorter, with eyes that seemed too soft for the profession. They introduced themselves in a manner that was both professional and perfunctory, indicating that this was just another case to them, another story to hear and file away. I recounted the events of that night, the fear palpable in my voice as I relived each moment. The disbelief was evident on their faces as I spoke of the creature that had attacked me, a being so monstrous, so utterly inhuman that even I struggled to believe it was real. But the evidence was there, clear as day, on my own body. The bites, the claw marks, they were undeniable. Yet when I showed them, hoping for some semblance of understanding, or at least acknowledgement, their skepticism remained. A crazed man can be as beastly as any creature, the taller officer remarked dismissively. Their words felt like a dismissal, a refusal to see beyond the realm of their understanding. It left me feeling helpless, abandoned to the whims of a world that refused to believe in the horrors that lurked in its shadows. A week passed in a blur of antiseptic hallways and the muted beeping of machines. My neck healed, slowly but surely, leaving a faint itch that seemed to burrow deeper into my skin with each passing day. When the day of my discharge arrived, it was with a sense of unreality that I stepped out of the hospital. My brother Paul was there with my son Jamie, whose small hand slipped into mine with a trust and innocence that brought tears to my eyes. "Are you okay, Dad?" he asked. His voice small but filled with concern. I could only nod, choking back the emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. "Thank you for saving me," he whispered, and I pulled him close, my heart aching for the terror he had faced not once but twice. Paul suggested we celebrate my discharge with dinner at the finest restaurant in town, a place I'd never imagined dining at. The atmosphere was warm, the soft murmur of conversation and the clinking of cutlery a comforting backdrop. Jamie's eyes lit up at the mention of waffles, and Paul ordered chicken with a casual ease. But when it came to me, an unfamiliar craving surfaced, strong and insistent. "Steak," I heard myself say. "Rare." Paul's eyebrows shot up in surprise. I was never one for steak, least of all rare. But the words had felt right, even as I idly scratched at the healing wound on my neck. Dinner passed in a strange haze. The steak tasted unlike anything I'd ever had, each bite filling me with a warmth that seemed to spread through my veins. Yet beneath the surface satisfaction, a coil of unease began to tighten. The itch on my neck flared with each mouthful, a persistent reminder of the night that had changed everything. As we left the restaurant, the night air felt heavy, laden with unspoken fears and secrets. Jamie's hand in mine was a lifeline, a beacon of innocence in a world that had suddenly become dark and uncertain. The ride home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Stepping into the house, the familiarity of it brought no comfort. Instead, each shadow seemed to hide lurking dangers, each creak of the floorboards a whispered threat. The itch on my neck was now a burning sensation, a constant reminder of the creature that had marked me as its own. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence of the house was oppressive. Every sound was magnified, every shadow a specter of fear. I could feel the presence of something unseen, a weight in the air that pressed down on me, suffocating. The events of the past week replayed in my mind, a relentless loop of fear and disbelief. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? The reality of my existence had been irrevocably altered, the lines between the natural and the supernatural blurred until indistinguishable. As sleep finally claimed me, it was with a sense of dread for what the coming days might bring, for the creature that had marked me was still out there and I was inexorably tied to it.